This video was originally recorded March 2020 at Tibet House US in New York City. To learn more about Tibet House US and the benefits of membership, please visit tibethouse.us.
Of the ordinary level biography. They have two levels of biography. They have what they call Tumombe Namtar, and the word for biography actually means liberation. They still use that same word, or release. So they have ordinary, and that's sort of the circumstances of his life, and he did this and he understood that. Then they have what they call Sangwe Namtar, the secret biography or secret liberation, and that talks about all his visionary experiences. And actually the first thing written about him by one of his disciples, Togden Jambal Gyatso, his name, who was known as a kind of visionary, are about all of Tsongkhapa's visionary experiences, which are really numerous and they're very elaborate, endless bunch of visions. He met everybody in the universe, I think. He did. But that's considered secret, during a person's life. But then afterwards, everybody talks about. So I was just going to read a little bit of this thing. The summer of the Earth Snake year caught my attention. 1389, and this was on Ökar Mountain, which is where he had eventually his long retreat, starting around 3 or 4 years later. But anyway, he was there earlier. In that summer, when Tsongkhapa was 33, he spent some time in solitary retreat on Ökar, a rocky mountain in the Yarlung Valley. He focused his practice on the Chakrasambhara Tantra, following a strict discipline of sitting for 4 sessions per day. That's 16 hours a day. And since he's doing a practice on Chakrasambhara, the way they do that is they recite a sadhana, which means something like some people call it an evocation, but it's a linear description of the body of the Chakrasambhara, which is a particular Buddha archetype deity form, and the mandala that they're in and the universe that they're in, after first dissolving the awareness of the ordinary universe. And so then they build up and they're in this alternative reality, depending on how vivid their visualization ability is. And then within that, they then meditate whatever level of meditation they're capable of doing. And then when they get tired of the visualization meditating and of exploring the experience of being a being with 2 legs and 4 faces and 12 arms, embracing a consort, partner, being embraced by a partner, all as visualization, where they feel they are both partners and all this sort of thing within this sort of universe. And they then feel how that feels to be such a being. And they cultivate what is called a pure vision. That is, they really see the mandala building and the palace of the world. And in the case of Chakrasambhara, there are 60 other deities who are in the mandala. And 24 couples, which is 48, 10 protectors, 58. No, 8 protectors, female. In Chakrasambhara case, the outer protectors are all kind of ferocious females, like female wrestlers or something. Some of them have animal heads and so on. And then 4 inner, what they call dakinis or yoginis. And so they experience being there kind of thing. And that's the meditation. And then when they get tired of that, of trying to build up this picture in their mind and really shift into this alternate sense of reality, they then return to sort of their ordinary body and they recite mantras for the rest of that hour. And then the next of the 4 sessions a day, they have to again repeat the whole evocation, the whole sadhana, and then again recite mantras. And then to finish a retreat like that, you have to do like 100,000 or 300,000 of the main mantra, and then 10,000 of all the subordinate mantras of all the others. So it takes time, But it doesn't say here he does a complete one, but just says he did that. He also practiced the 6 yogas of Niguma. He did 4 sentences as well as performing the self-empowerment rites of the Tantra. And this brings me to, as I was reading it today, I feel like quibbling with the translator, but not just him. Everyone uses the word empowerment, but it's a wrong word, I think, actually. The Sanskrit word for this is abhisheka. And abhisheka means anointment, literally. And like, the Greek Christos, Christo means to be anointed. And, the idea of Christ, like christening, we have that word in English, of a baby, you christen the baby. And I think the Tibetans translate it as Wangkurwa. But by translating it as Wangkurwa, I think they're contracting Wangbukurwa, Wangbugosakurwa. They're contracting a phrase which means to confer the status of a prince, like a coronation. Because when you coronate somebody in the ancient Brahminic ritual, just like Queen Elizabeth, I remember when I was a little kid, I saw her in the 50s getting coronated. They dump some sort of oil on their head. There's like it's sort of ritually prepared, it's seemingly magical, but they anoint them, right? I mean, they don't get all greasy with their elaborate costume. It must be some kind of like a perfume, I guess, So anyway, but in Tibetan, the word Indra, the word for prince is translating Sanskrit Indra, and it's Wangbo. And Wangbo, the bo suffix means a person who has authority or power or ability, Wangbo. So then when Westerners saw Wangkurwa, they thought it was conferring power. You follow me? But actually it was conferring the status of a prince by anointing them, because it's translating the Sanskrit word anointment. So initiation is a much better word, which is well known. Anointment might be confusing for people. It might be like a massage or something, or like something like that. But then the empowerment were just this connotation that, initiation, it's like, I call it in-flight refueling of your fighter plane, from a tanker, like a hose comes down and the gas flows into the engine, into the tank of the other plane, So, and then that creates a false idea about the relationship of the student and the teacher, that the teacher is somehow giving some energy. But it's not the case, in fact. The student has to bring their own energy. But they're given they're put in a position where they feel a kind of confidence, and it's like getting a license about something. In a way, yes, you get a license. That doesn't give you more strength to grip the steering wheel of the car, but it gives you a feeling of competence to drive the car, right? I mean, of course, and you're not supposed to get it until you are competent, right? So it's more like, initiation is more like licensing somebody, rather than filling up their tank. and there's this Tibetan saying that they themselves say, and they say that the great Indian yogis have one initiation and hundreds of attainments. And our Tibetan yogis have hundreds of initiations and no attainments. They have their own self-deprecatory saying like that. And I think the way that the tantras are being studied and taught in America is a little bit the latter, basically, because they don't, and since they're getting more power, by having more initiations. Meanwhile, if they knew what they were doing, getting more and more initiations, they'd be more and more worried, because there are all these things to fulfill and to recite and to keep up with that they make commitments to do when they receive most initiations, and they can't possibly do that, when they have a regular busy life, Anyway, I'm sorry, I just felt I had to say that. He also practiced the 6 yogas of Niguma, who was supposed to be the sister of Naropa. So it's one of the few sets of yogas taught by a woman, an Indian woman, sister of Naropa, the great Indian Siddha. An important instruction of the Shangba Kadyu tradition, stemming from the Indian yogini Niguma. In between the formal sessions, Tsong engaged in intensive breath-based yogic exercises connected with Dumo, which I translate as furor, fire or furor. he gives a bracket here, psychic heat. But psychic is actually wrong because it's actually physical heat, you know. But that's he's just doing that out of a dictionary. Practice, Tummo practice, performing this exercise up to 100 times a session. The experience, that's a lot. In 4 hours, you do 100 times of a Tummo generating of this heat from the navel chakra. And the real way of generating that physical heat is it goes up the central channel and melts hormones, drops from your brain and filling the body with blissful energy. And the whole thing that you've all seen and heard about where some Lama yogi goes out in the winter and melts ice blocks and puts cold sheets around themselves and things like that, that's a byproduct. And Milarepa's living naked in the Himalayas in the winter is a byproduct of the inner heat in the center of the nervous system that is the most important one. It's just a little bit of outer fire, you know, but that's not supposed to be important. The experience that Tsongkhapa gained, especially of Tummo, during this retreat would deeply affect his understanding of the key meditative practices associated with the mother tantra, Chakrasamvara and Hevajra being the two important ones in the class, including their unique methods of engendering bliss and applying it to meditative practice. And so I just thought that was fun. There he's only 32 in our way of counting and 33 in Tibetan way of counting, since they count in your lifespan, the year you spent, or the near year that you spent in your mother's womb. They count that as a year of your life. You know. So then skipping, the next thing is quite interesting. Around this time, I'm skipping other stuff. Two of Tsongkhapa's students, Sonam Jak and Geshe Sherab Jak, at the age of 33 or 32, he was already a big teacher, and he was teaching all kinds of things to students. And what is typical of him and was so surprising to us, in addition to continuing his meditative practice during this same period of time, he taught many students and scholars who followed him, actually. He was trying on a retreat, and these people all followed him because he was already a well-known teacher. And he taught them Kala Chakra. That's a very elaborate tantra to teach. Practice, undoubtedly. And the perfection of wisdom, that's the Mahayana Sutra, you know, the Prajna Paramita. I call it transcendent wisdom, but never mind. The Abhidharma, which is very sort of scientific cosmology sort of type thing in psychology. And Dharmakirti's exposition of validating cognition. And that's very logic. That's epistemology and logic. Very rigorous type of thing. So both Tantra and transcendent wisdom and sort of technical Abhidharma, Buddhist science, and also logic, you know. So all together, you know. So mixing them together, so to speak, you know. And then, anyway, he went to go somewhere else. So then, when he was there, two of his students went to see the mystic Umapa Pawu Dorje, a person named Zundra Senge, who was staying at a nearby hermitage. This mystic was famed for having constant visions of Manjushri. The students met with Umapa and received some transmissions from him. During their conversation, Umapa said he wanted to receive the blessings of the goddess Saraswati from their teacher. You know, Saraswati is like the female Manjushri. She's the goddess of art in Hinduism as well, and literature and music and all the arts. But she's also wisdom, because you can't really be a great artist without wisdom. And so she's like a female Manjushri, really, basically. The two of them are kind of couple in a certain way, you know. And Tsongkhapa was known for having a special connection with Yangtze Saraswati, and so he wanted to receive teachings of Saraswati from him. So the students, So upon their return, the two students passed on the message to Tsongkhapa, who soon visited Umapa and conferred the desired Saraswati blessing on him. Thus like an initiation, but it's a little bit lighter, called a blessing, Jinlap. During their conversation, Umapa told Tsongkhapa that even from his early years as a young yak herder in eastern Tibet, he would have occasional visions of Manjushri and would receive teachings. He's putting that very, he's putting it very lightly. What actually the usual story is, he was sitting herding his yaks, and he had this freight train type of sound and collapsed and passed out. And when he woke up, there was Manjushri. And then he always saw him all the time. And Manjushri was constantly fussing and scolding and telling him to go here and go there. And it was like a mystic encounter, but it wasn't like a big thing with a woo-woo thing. The guy was always hanging out there and bossing him around. And very Buddhist, Mystic experiences are not just the big lights and things, but they sit and talk and dictate books and things too, They're like that. During their conversation, Umapa told them. So he confided, although I have tried my best to examine whether or not this is a genuine visionary encounter, I still haven't been able to gain full conviction. In fact, then he confessed, in fact, it was Manjushri who urged me this time to go and receive the Saraswati blessing from you. So this is also typical. Like you have visions when meditating, or these practitioners do, and then they always suspect them, that they're hallucinations or fantasies or some sort of, sidetracking thing. They don't necessarily think, oh yeah, that was Gabriel, or that was Jesus, or that was whoever it was. They question it, always, and they have ways that they ask their teachers to verify and so on. So he asked Tsong to verify it, even though he'd been doing this for years by the time he met Tsong. And then while Umapa was experiencing visions of Manjushri, Tsong asked him some important questions concerning the view of emptiness and other points of Dharma practice. Of course, that view of emptiness is the critical one, right? You guys all know about emptiness, right? Everybody does. Right? Yeah? It's easy. It just means relativity. It doesn't mean some big, dark space, nothing at all. It just means all the interconnection of everything, and there's nothing that isn't interconnected. That's all it means. Everything is empty of any non-connected piece, which is just almost the tautology, basically, we would say. It's obvious. So, after considering his answers, Tsongkhapa told Umapa that the visions that he had were credible and that he should not have any further doubt about their authenticity. In other words, whoever was appearing to Umapa, Tsongkhapa already seen, although 33 years old, seen as an authority about philosophy and emptiness and whatever, he was able to verify that the God of wisdom was really present in Umapa's vision. He then advised the mystic, you should fervently pray to Manjushri, but you must, and this I thought was amazing, but you must remember that the form that one sees with the eyes is not actually Manjushri himself. The genuine form of a meditation deity appears only at the level of mental cognition, not sensory perception. That is quite interesting. What does that mean? Of course, he's saying, in a way, the mental sense, he's saying mental cognition, but it's really, I think he should be saying the mental sense. Now, in Buddhist epistemology, we have the 5 physical senses, and then there's a 6th sense. And the 6th sense is called the mental sense, and it resides in the heart. And so it's a consciousness from a sort of more subtle level. And it is why sometimes, if you're intently looking at something, you won't hear something someone says. Your ears will hear it, actually, and subliminally you'll hear it. They will take it, but you won't notice it, right? Have you ever noticed that? Of course you have. Or sometimes you're listening to, Mozart or Ravi Shankar or something, and you see something happens in front of your eyes, but you don't pay attention to it. So the fact that you can pay attention to this sense impression versus that one has to do with where the mental sense is related. And by saying that, by Tsongkhapa saying that, he's talking at a very deep meditative level to Umapa. Because, for example, you all know those Tibetan, of course we have nothing to look at just now between shows, but you all know that the multi-armed deities, or what they're calling the meditation deity, I call them archetype deities. The actual Sanskrit word and Tibetan word is yidam. And dam means to choose, from the verb dampa, to pick something out or choose, and yi means mind, so mentally chosen. The Sanskrit word ishtadevata, or Yidam Hla, I guess would be this written. Hla means deity. So Ishta Devata, chosen deity. Ishta means desired or chosen deity, wished for deity. So what he's saying there is that although you see a form as if there was a coarse-bodied person, like the youthful Manjushri with his sword and his book, he's saying to Umapa, the actual Manjushri presence can be only known from your subtle awareness, which is your mental awareness. And in a very auspicious way, he's kind of predicting maybe, or he's nudging Umapa to see from the eyes of his subtle body. For example, which we all do. For example, if you have a dream, and you see things in the dream, if you remember the dream, or you hear things in the dream, or smell them, or taste them, or touch them, although those close senses are quite rare in dreams, usually, for most people. Usually we see things, and maybe hear things. But the senses that you see, hear, and so forth in a dream are the reproductions by your mental consciousness of something like your normal external coarse body. Do you follow? Which is why they say the dream body is sort of like what happens after death, what they call the between body, or the bardo body. Bardo just means between. There's nothing mysterious about the word. So the between body. So he's saying that actually if you saw with your subtle, the senses of your subtle body, and the subtle body is the subtle consciousness, or the mental consciousness is able, therefore, like in a dream state, or at a certain very advanced meditative state, to feel it's in a completely other body and reproduce a set of senses. So that therefore, and they always say that, like, if you, I don't know if any of you have ever, how many of you have ever had an initiation and tried to do a visualization practice of yourself as some sort of meditation deity, let's call it, or archetype deity? Only one of you, two of you, three of you, right? So I know I did that when I first, years ago, like 50 years ago, when I first heard about this thing. I sort of would close my eyes and I would try to think that this whole body was another body. But one's not supposed to do that. When they say at the beginning of the thing where you melt everything into voidness, and also I did that was very wrong. I thought of everything disappearing into blank space or something. That's also wrong, because voidness is not the blank space. This itself is voidness. So when they say let it all be voidness, it just means let it all be malleable as a relativities. May everything be transformable, like shapeable, reshapeable, let's say. Not sort of solidly what it seems to be. That's what it means. And so that in doing that, then one gets a sense from the subtle mind that one is a different body, rather than sort of, well, now I should be, okay, I'm moving this arm, but actually I have 6 arms coming out of this shoulder. And I try to impose it upon my feeling of the one arm. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to like give up the feeling of being in your ordinary body, and then as they say, arise in whatever other kind of body it might be. Which is really quite interesting, and it seems completely mysterious to us, of course, because unless we happen to be great meditators, and if you have a quite strong expertise in meditation and can develop very, very stable concentration, then you kind of can, ignore your body, for example. There's out-of-body states, there's lots of them. That doesn't mean that's enlightenment at all, necessarily. But you can do that. In other words, you can abandon feeling that you're just sitting in the body. You can understand what I'm saying, maybe. And if you have the concentration, we can all have a hint of it. But if you develop concentration, you can. So it's that kind of a mind that has a little bit of that stability that goes into the advanced type of tantric thing. And Tsongkhapa saying this to Umapa, he's actually considering Umapa already at a certain type of level. I thought that was quite fabulous. I didn't know this. I didn't know this exchange, the actual conversation between them, because the short biographies don't say that. So that means that Jimba did this great research. That's why I love this book. Tsongkhapa then went on to say that for his part, he would like to receive teachings from Manjushri with Umapa as the medium. But for the moment, I need to go to Taksang to see my teacher, Rendawa, so let's arrange to meet again in the near future. So he remains practical. He doesn't spouse out and just say, I'm never leaving until I can talk to Manjushri with you forever. He goes, I have to see my ordinary teacher first, I have an appointment, blah, blah. And so he goes. But then Tsong completely spends time with Manjushri, with Umapa, for many years. And then he becomes... I wanted to do this one. And then he gets his final teaching from Manjushri. And this is a very questionable, a lot of, some Tibetans and some Western scholars question this, and they say it's all this, and they make a whole noise about it. But because of course they don't believe there is such a thing as Manjushri, and that you can talk to an archangel or whatever, they mostly don't. But still, even they will kind of admit, well, okay, so his own original genius, sort of under the inner Manjushri, okay, that meant his inner genius, and he came up with an idea about the nature of emptiness and relativity that none of his predecessors in Tibet had come up with, and he read the great Indian masters that way, and he sort of therefore returned to what he felt was the level of insight of the original Indian masters, especially Nagarjuna and so on. And but he himself says, and like in the biography, he says that he got that from the very person who inspired Nagarjuna, which was Manjushri, who's a Buddha actually. Anyway, I wanted to now read, so there's that little bit dipping into the bio. I wanted to read this book, this thing which I call Destiny Fulfilled. I translated it long ago, and at the time there's this thing, it's called Dunlegma. A short, Tokjo Dunlegma. And Tokjo means expression of understanding. So it's like your story of your own education, what you had inside. I took Shakespeare 101, and then I really memorized Hamlet, and then that was really great, and then I took Waller's course in poetry. It's like a thing like that. And Dun Legma, Dun here is being translated as destiny, which it can because it means something in front of you. Dun means like the movie Kundun. Right, that is a contraction of the Tibetan expression ku, which is the honorific for body, and dun means in front. So a name for the Dalai Lama that Tibetans use is kundun, meaning the honorable body in front of me, meaning that they're not acting like they know what it is, like this incarnation of Avalokiteshvara. It's just the body that appears to me, the kundun, the presence. So more daringly nowadays, I tend to translate it as Dun Leg Ma. The Ma just goes with the poem, the thing. So it's the poem of the good presence. But Tibetans will argue with me about it. But I'll explain it when I get to it. I'll tell you why. So I'm changing my own translation here. I'm being critical of myself. So he begins, Om, may all be happy and well. I bow to the feet of the kind Guru, root of all good fortune, and of the holy wisdom treasure Manjushri, who are the eye to see the liberation of enlightenment and even all ascendants in the world, and who are the place of recuperation from the weary wandering in the roads of life. So that's like his open salutation. And ascendance means, improving your status in life. Because if you get any progress you make toward the liberation, the release of enlightenment, then that also improves your worldly status. But your motive is not to improve your worldly status. The motive is the enlightenment. But it just comes along automatically with it. That's typical sort of thing. Then it says, when one's efforts still are slight, it is said to be best to congratulate others' virtues in order to gather the momentous stores of merit and knowledge. And one feels an even greater joy, especially when free of claims to one's own past virtues, and thinks just increase past virtues evermore in order to live up to the import of the of the Buddha's teaching, also seeing many other dire necessities, it is excellent, O my mind, when you feel such joy, he says. And here this is very nice, because he's saying, actually my Taro Tulku, one of my favorite and most respected and great gratitude receiving lamas, was called Taro Tulku. And he used to say, oh, that's the best thing, congratulating others' merit. He said, that's the lazy person's way to accumulating merit. In other words, you don't even do a good thing yourself, but you think, isn't that great that so-and-so did it? And then you get a little bit of the merit, as if you did it yourself. I think he was talking about your mirror neurons. That concept of mirror neurons. I don't know if you ever heard of that. That's a great concept they discovered watching some monkeys. Where when you see something, like or in a movie, then you mentally go through it with the person that you identify with. But then there's a danger, and he used to say to Tartuko that our normal self-centered mind always resents other people's successes, and when they do something great, and we think, well, okay, but why didn't I do that, or why didn't that happen to me, or like I could have done that. We're a little bit, niggling about it, like not really, and so we're jealous, in other words. And then that's really terrible. Then we get bad karma from their doing a good thing. And then the other danger is somebody robs a bank and does some horrible thing, like in one of those movies like Oceans, whatever, 10 or 12 or something. And then we think, well, that was a cool heist. Then we get the bad karma of stealing and no cash. So that's really bad. So you have to guard against secret, congratulating someone for doing a bad thing. But we should really congratulate people for doing a good thing. So he puts that in, Tsong Khapa just puts that in before getting to the real story of his poem. Well, that's really good. That's the best. It's said to be best to congratulate others' virtues and merits. But then he also says it's a greater joy, on the other hand, to dedicate, and that's what, like when you finish a class or something, you always say, by the virtue of this, whatever we did, teach or learn, and best teaching you're learning too as you go, and but we dedicate, it may we soon all become Manjushri, and may we dedicate that all beings may also achieve that state. So you give away whatever you gained, in other words, right immediately you invest it in Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. That's really cool. Then you can't lose it by being silly later. That's really nice. I love that he does that. In order to live up, so therefore he says, when free of claims to one's own past virtues, thinking, and all one should think is increase past virtues evermore, in order to live up to the import of the Buddha's teaching, and also see the many other dire necessities of life. It is excellent in my mind when you feel such joy. And now he actually begins. He says, first, I sought out often extensive learning. Then all teachings dawned as practices. Finally, I practiced all day and all night, completely dedicated to spread the teaching. And then the refrain of his whole poem is thinking this over, and then the way that Tibetans will translate this, and I was being good here, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you so very much, O holy wisdom treasure. Now that second line is direct address. Kadin Cheu Jetsun Kembiter. And holy treasure of wisdom is an alternate name of Manjushri. And then he puts Kadin Cheo, and the Cheo makes it direct, like vocative, So the second line is he's talking to Manjushri. He's feeling grateful and speaking to him. So, Duma Legne Da, you being your presence so wonderful before me, is the way to translate it. So the whole poem is written sitting in front of Manjushri later in Tsong Khapa's life. And he's talking to his angel, in other words. And he's saying, but the Tibetans won't do that. I have to argue with them about it. But I love it. Duma legne da. And the word da is not the usual verb to be, was. Legne, Dhamma, legne, da. So Dhamma, if you translate that as destiny, Dhamma, you can. And legne, the destiny being excellent, da, it is so. Then he unnecessarily says da, a word to be. And he doesn't use the legne yin, or something would be the normal way of saying it was good. But he says legne da. And da is a form of the verb to be that's like very much ta-da, It's like that, da, in Tibetan. So I really think that's what it is. So thinking this over, there you are wonderfully before me. Thank you so much, O holy, your holiness, wisdom treasure. That's what nowadays I will argue that out. I'm going to battle it out one of these days with them. If the darkness that then he goes on the verse. If the darkness that hides the basis of right and wrong is not illuminated by the lamp of true learning, you cannot know even the path, and not to speak of entrance into the supreme city of liberation. It's interesting how nirvana, liberation I'm using for nirvana, but in ancient Indian and in sutras and things and Pali and everything, they always connect nirvana to a city. So they felt liberated in a city from, the drudgery of the farm or something, or being in the countryside. We in the city, we love to go out in the countryside. But, in ancient, the city, you get liberated from your little tribal village and your little, whatever it is, you go to the big city, even in those days. So it's always like nirvana is a city, Entrance to the supreme city of liberation. Therefore, not satisfied with partiality and rough ideas, I trained carefully in all the treatises of the invincible Lord of Dharma. Here he's referring to the Maitreya, the future, these 5 books that were dictated by Maitreya to Sangha in India a long time ago and are considered scriptures by the later Indians and by the Tibetans. And of those great sages widely renowned in India as the 6 ornaments and the 2 superiors. And those are a set of 8 great Indian masters who are, they set up the curriculum for the Nalanda and Vikramashila and many hundreds of other Indian monastic universities, and they also continue in the curriculum of all the great Tibetan monastic universities. Again, thinking this over, you so wonderfully present to me, thank you so much, O holy wisdom treasure. Especially for an egocentric person, he says, the sole door for determining the precise reality of things is the treatise on valid reasoning. So with many efforts I studied its crucial points again and again. So he starts right off. First thing that really helped me out is I became very rationally acute, intellectually acute. That's the first step, he's saying. Isn't this quite different from how Buddhism is taught to us? That's because we are Westerners, and we think we are very smart. And we read Aristotle. He wrote how many thousand years ago? Or we read like Quine, William Van Orman Quine, some kind of super logic. Oh, we're really smart. We know math. We're scientists. And we never want to notice that we're all nuts, actually. We are. We think we're really smart. So we naturally think Buddhist. So we're smart and we're still miserable. So we think being smart is not helpful. So nobody teaches you Buddhism is you should sharpen up your brain. They don't tell you, they shut off your brain. And then you go and you're going to be really happy. And actually you do get a bit of relief if you stop worrying and thinking. You get a buzz from that. And then, that must be enlightenment. And then we wonder why when Buddha attained enlightenment, he didn't just stand up and go, duh. We wonder. So, you have to have wisdom is a sharp sword, a scalpel of analysis, of unraveling, cutting through confusions, okay? Then there's the refrain, thinking this over, blah, blah. So I had worked hard on the treatises of Sutra and Tantra, and I was practicing and teaching the impact of the profound. I saw that my view had not advanced far beyond the view that has learned nothing and nothing knows. So then I studied thoroughly all the essential keys that bring out the authentic view, which I found on the path of subtle philosophy that examines the profound, especially in the scientific treatises of Nagarjuna, and I resolved all my doubts completely. So here he's referring to the great experience that he achieved in 1398, 9 years after that year we were reading about here, where after 5 years of a long retreat and a bunch of travels and receiving more teachings, during those 9 years, mostly he spent most of the time at the retreat, because once he got into talking to Manjushri and getting his questions answered, after not that long of doing that, just a few years, maybe 2-3 years, couple of years with Umapa, and then the other scholars who were expecting him already to be a teacher, he was already like in, he was already a professor among them. He left instead and hung out in retreat with this mystic guy. They were all annoyed about it. They thought he was wasting his time and he was just getting all fascinated with that, and the guy was crazy and maybe he was going crazy and whatever. And but anyway, after all of that and then this and that, he finally one morning had this dream. And in the dream, he was in Tushita heaven where Maitreya has a Dharma center. And then in that Dharma center, Nagarjuna and Tsong, all these people were, and Chandrakirti, they were all discussing the deep points of the central way about emptiness and relativity. And then Buddha Palita, a great Indian pandit called Buddha Palita, yogi and pandit, left the group and came toward him where he was in his dream body, because he wasn't in the group, he was sort of a little bit away from them, hearing them, and carrying a copy of his book, his commentary on Nagarjuna's thing, and touched him on the head with it. And then he woke up feeling ecstatic, and he looked back at the book actually on the table, and then boom, the universe turned inside out for him. So he's referring to that. And he resolved all his doubts. That's when that happened. And actually he says, I saw that my view, but how did he see that? In another source, it says, and I think it's in this book too, he asked Manjushri at some point, once he was directly talking with him, he said, well, how's my view? And do I have a good understanding of ultimate reality and the true realities, voidness, the ultimate reality and the relative reality, etc. And Manjushri said, no, you don't. You have the simplistic view that when your mind is got no thought in it, when it's not holding anything in particular, and it's empty of any thoughts, that's the view of emptiness, and that's nihilism, and that's completely wrong. And so, but you know all the reasons how you know yourself that it's wrong, but you're just stuck there. And so you have to go have a retreat, and you have to purify yourself, and you have to do this and that. And then what you already know at a deeper level will come out, and you won't be stuck in that nihilism. But so, he saw, he says here, but actually he saw because Manjushri told him, go have this long retreat. Stop asking me the same question over and over when you know the answer already yourself. So thinking this over, how nice it is to have you with me. Thank you so much, O Holy Wisdom Treasure. Then the next one, he says, it is said that there are two vehicles for the journey to perfect enlightenment. The transcendence vehicle, that's the sutra of the transcendent wisdom, Prajnaparamita, and the deep Vajra vehicle, and that's the tantras. And the secret tantras are very much superior to the vehicle of the transcendences. So here you're saying, which, meaning that they are more advanced and they're wonderful. This is as well known as sun and moon. Yet there are those weighty with pretended wisdom who, while verbally asserting the truth of that saying, make no inquiry into that vehicle of the profound, meaning the Vajrayana or Tantrayana. If such as they are supposed to be intelligence, how could anyone else ever be thought dumb? Alas, it is amazing that any should repudiate such an unexcelled path, so hard to come across. Therefore, I entered that deep treasury of twin accomplishments, that means ordinary, mundane and transcendent accomplishments of the Tantra, siddhis of the Tantra. The supreme vehicle of the victors, the Buddha, the Vajra vehicle, more rare even than the Buddhas, And I worked hard at it and studied it long. So, this is all of these verses are about his quest of extensive learning. Remember that first verse gives the summary of this. So he's learning the tantras. And that was, big surprise to me in my 30s. Because in the Tibetan tradition, when I was a monk, I was in my early 20s. And then you get initiated right away. They always initiate you, like if you were 6 or 7, they'll initiate you. And then you recite something, but you don't really study it, and you think out later, and then because you need to have some preliminary safeguarding insights first from studying the transcendence vehicle type of thing. And but then you start in the 30s, and I remember in my 30s when I did begin to sort of get more serious about the tantras, like really trying to practice them in some way. I thought this will just be meditating, and then to my horror, I discovered that they also are a huge study, and they have their own thing. Nowadays, I call it tantric abhidharma, which they don't use the term in that context, but I call it that because abhidharma means the scientific, analytic way of presenting the teaching in a very methodical manner, rather than the individual sort of scriptural kind of weighty words, or diamond words, as they call it. But you really study how to use them and what to do, and it's just incredible. Huge. It's like Buddhist neuroscience. It's like a really complex bunch of stuff, mantric science, something like that. And so he said, I studied it a lot, and so on. He talks about that. So then again, thinking this over, then he says, seeing clearly that if I did not understand the methods of the paths of the 3 lower tantras, that's the action, performance, and yoga tantras, my decision that the unexcelled yoga tantra is best of all would be no more than an unsupported assertion. So I inquired deeply into the general and specific 3 types of action tantra, performance tantra, and he talks about that. Again, he gives the thing. And then he says, among the second class, the practice tantras, or performance tantras, as I call them nowadays, I studied the main tantra, Vairochana Abhisambodhi, and I ascertained thoroughly the precise orientation of all the practice tantras. And then the third class yoga tantras, I studied the main one there, the Tattva Samgraha and the Vajrashekara. And I enjoyed the banquet of the yoga tantra. So these are, most of us nowadays, we ignore those and we want to jump to Guhya Samaja or Chakrasambhara or Vajrayogini or something, and we ignore these more preliminary ones, but he says you shouldn't do that, and he really does that. Then finally he comes among the 4th class, the unexcelled yoga tantras. This is like they're the equivalent, like the Dzogchen of the Nyingmas. I studied the root tantras and explanatory tantras of the father tantra, Sri Guhya Samaja, renowned as sun and moon among the Indian sages, and of the yogini tantras such as Sambhara and Hevajra and the Kala Chakra tantra of the champions, whose method differs from other sutras and tantras, along with its commentary, the Vimala Prabha. So that's the whole first section, showing his huge study, and how you have to study all this stuff. Then second, all teachings dawn as practices or as trainings. So this is part 2, in other words, of what he did. So he says, he's now giving a list of more of his practices and insights. And he begins with a firm, intense, and enduring faith in Manjushri, best at banishing the darkness from the disciple's mind. I prayed that all the teachings might dawn as practices, and I applied myself to all the requisite conditions. Working in that way, I found a special certainty in the stages of the path of enlightenment, the traditions descended from Nagarjuna and Asanga, and the Transcendent Wisdom Sutra, the best book on the profound, dawned as a practical training for me. The book itself did. And then he goes on, then he immediately goes to the logic. And that's one of the things in that thing that I will eventually read. The unification or the coordination of the sort of more transcendence-oriented things, the critical centrist philosophy of the centrist school with the logic. So, because previous to him, if you were a big logician in the monastic university, you thought, oh, those guys jumping off the deep end into emptiness, they're like beyond it all, they don't need logic, and I don't even like them, you know. And the people who were doing the other one, the deep emptiness meditating, they were, oh, who needs logic? It's a worldly science, you know, logic and epistemology. So it's not part of the path of enlightenment. So that was another one of Tsong Khapa's coordinations, you know, his liberation, his centrist liberations was unifying logic and transcendence, you know, logic and transcendence. He unified them, or coordinated them. Yeah, one wants to say unified, but that's wrong. Sungdal means coordinated. That's very important to say. So here he's talking about after the Nagarjuna, the transcendence thing, he goes back to the logic thing. So, but what you take as authoritative, the direct revelation granted by Manjushri to Dignaga, saying explicitly that this book will in the future become the eye for all beings. Thus, seeing that the above view was absolutely wrong, and especially investigating deeply the procedures therein, I developed a deep-seated conviction about the import of the dedication of the compendium of validating reason, that the Lord Buddha, as the personification of reason, is authoritative for the seeker of liberation, because of his unerring description of evolution and cessation, and that therefore his teaching is the only haven for those who would be free. And I found a special joy in getting clear all keys of the path of both vehicles by studying them in combination on the path of reasoning. So this is another really great synthesis that's the greatness of Tsong Khapa. Instead of saying, throw away your reasoning, it's useless, it's conceptuality, the real big thing is non-conceptual direct experience, and if you have to throw that away and you just grok the emptiness, you just plunge into it and blah, blah, blah. And he's saying that's wrong, and that the reasoning brings you to the sheer negation that is emptiness, but which is a different kind of realization. I think we've discussed that, right? Remember the saying that I said, I think I said it in the first class, where Buddha says to people, what I love about Buddha, he says, I know everything, and I'm so happy. That's a relief. If you could say, I know everything, and it sucks. And actually, too many people think that's what Buddha said. And they think that's really great. But I think that's very mistaken. You know, he only said it sucks if you don't know what it is. I know everything and I'm really happy is what he said. The real reality is the third noble truth, the nirvana. And because I discovered that, I'm telling you that the way you are, you're miserable. And therefore, don't think that you're going to get somewhere just staying the way you are. You have to find your deeper inner level, where you actually yourself know you're actually your life force, your life energy, is your sense of being all right. That's your health, that's your vitality, that's your bliss. There was a horrible New Yorker cartoon I didn't like, where one guy is standing in front of a church in a suburb, and he's all unshaven and scruffy, he's like a beggar, he has a tin cup, and he has a sign around his chest that says, follow your bliss. He's begging from people out, you know, they're teasing Joseph Campbell. Remember, Joseph Campbell famously said that. So that's some hippies say that, and then they're all begging, you know. The New Yorker was really rude, I thought, with that one, but it was funny. Follow your bliss. Here, give me a dime. I'm following my bliss. That's wrong, though. Anyway. But that's a really big difference, you know. For example, one of my dear academic friends, he wrote a wonderful book, if you're interested in Indian philosophy, including Buddhist, or any of the Vedanta, or any of them, Mimamsa. It's called Presuppositions of India's Philosophy by Karl Potter, with a K, Karl, P-O-T-T-E-R, Potter. And in that he has a wonderful chapter on the different types of, the different Indian schools, many of them, and their way of presenting causality, which is fundamental for all of them, how they understand cause and effect. And he has two extremes, and one is Vedanta on one side, and then the centrism, Madhyamaka, or the Buddhist centrism, the highest Buddhist one on this side. And he puts them together as what he calls leap philosophies, meaning that reason can only take you so far, and then these two extreme ones, you have to leap beyond. and then when you leap beyond, you'll get enlightened or something. And that was the general understanding that the people had. And that's a general understanding in Buddhism, that you have to throw away your reasoning. And definitely Zen has been taught in the West like that. And a lot of people in Buddhist philosophy, they teach like that. Indian or Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And Khapa disproves that by saying that, it's to discover that this room here at Menla, at the Tibet House, is devoid of an elephant. It lacks an elephant. Okay, you're looking, you investigate the room for the elephant. You have to know what an elephant is. Under what conditions would you discover it if it was here? We then proceed to search for it. And that's never ending, actually. But you do terminate it, practically speaking, within a reasonable thing. And then there's no elephant. And the no elephant is a big mind opening about whatever else is there. Although in a way it's just the opening. It doesn't close around anything else that you find there. So in a way it frees you. It makes the room potentially available for any other thing because there's no elephant. So the reasoning, and going along with it, reasoning is a kind of investigation, especially Indian reasoning. In Greek reasoning, what? All men are mortal, Socrates is man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Right? You have a general rule, you have an individual case, and then you make your conclusion based on that. And that's partially like the Indian syllogism, except in the Indian syllogism you have to have an example and a counterexample where that rule holds good, and a counterexample where it doesn't. If you don't have those applications in reality, you can end up arguing in abstract about anything, and it can go anywhere. So you have to have concrete example and a counterexample in your Indian syllogism, let's say. And so the Buddhist one is not leap, in the sense that you don't leap to the non-elephant. You find the non. You don't find the elephant, simply you don't find it. And at a certain point of not finding it, you terminate your quest for it, and then you're free to interact with the room in a way as if you don't have to worry about an elephant in the room. And that's a reasonable thing, and yet it's not a closure, it's an opening, which is the rule in negation. And so, for example, you get the paradox that Buddhism has no theory, actually. It has no ultimate theory of reality, because ultimate reality is beyond theories. Ultimate means actual reality, real reality. Except, therefore, but in a way you have to admit that the theory of no theory is a theory on a relative level, but it's not an ultimate theory. Because when the no theory works, that leaves you open to keep trying to find a theory if you feel the need for one, type of thing, in other words. It doesn't shut down the idea that, the whole way in which we work, we have individual experiences, we then make inferences, we have general rules, and we live by them, actually. They're not irrelevant and they're not meaningless. So therefore, this reason brings you right to the brink of enlightenment. It doesn't control the enlightenment, but it opens you to the enlightenment, let's say. And if you throw it away anywhere, according to his teaching and insight, if you throw it away on an idea and a theory that reasoning is useless, then you have abdicated the possibility of uncovering your deeper biases and prejudices, where you're holding on to your own reality and holding on to all sorts of things that you're not conscious of. And so reasoning is like the lamp within which you look into your own unconscious, actually, ultimately, and you discover there's no elephant in your unconscious. Yeah. Actually, never mind. Then through the hard methodical work of interconnecting the Bodhisattva Bhumi, that means the stages of the Bodhisattvas, and the ornament of the Mahayana scriptures, all the treatises of the invincible Dharma Lord, that's the future Buddha Maitreya, and those following, them arose as a practical training for me, he said. Especially depending upon the Shiksha Samuchaya, that's the book that Shantideva wrote that undergirds his famous Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. It's called the collection of precepts, Shiksha Samuchaya, which grants certainty about all the essentials of the path by arranging the profound and magnificent scriptures in stages. I saw clearly as stages of practice the many meanings of the best treatises of Nagarjuna, such as his Sutra Samuchaya. Then he goes into Tantra. I think I don't want to just read all this because they're just a lot of names, but he goes through all the different Tantra classes in his practice. And then he gets really excited about the Guhya Samaja, the esoteric community Tantra, which the Supreme, and then this is a real sticking point. I'm going to get in such a trouble with the academic community, especially the European and Japanese ones. And, Nagarjuna supposedly lived maybe in the 2nd century of the Common Era, or maybe in the 1st century of the Common Era, they think. And he wrote, and there were 2 of them in that era. One was a doctor who wrote medical texts, and one was a philosopher who wrote the great books on emptiness, the great critical centrist treatises, and rediscovered actually the transcendent wisdom or Prajnaparamita Sutras, according to some legend, But of course, modern people think that one wrote them himself and then pretended Buddha wrote them, because of course they are not respectful. And then there's the Nagarjuna who wrote important tantric practice works, really extraordinary ones. And he had a whole set of students with him. But since the Westerners think that tantras only came around 8th, 9th century of the Common Era, couldn't be the same Nagarjuna. So these are these 3 famous Nagarjunas. And the stupid Indians, who are natives after all, as far as these kind of people go, they didn't know. They don't care about history, so they don't know what Nagarjuna 1, 2, 3. Well, they know. They don't know. We Westerners, we figured it out. But of course, the great Tibetan scholars, philosophers, historians, critical readers, philologists, logicians, whatever you want about them, they insist it's the same people. Same Nagarjuna wrote the exoteric philosophical works and tantras, and tantric commentaries. And we're masters of both. All those critical academic Buddhist monastic university scholars for hundreds of years in India and Tibet, India as well as Tibet, they all consider it the same person. The especially difficult one is Nagarjuna, because it makes him like Obi-Wan. He keeps showing up. And he's said to have lived 600 years, actually. He was an alchemist, he didn't eat food. So that's one way. And the other way is like subtle body, Obi-Wan type of appearances to the later disciples. Then Chandrakirti is not so hard because he lived 7th century. And that's just when tantras begin to become more out there, because the Indian society had become safe for that to be out there. The Buddha, but the Westerners never think, because they don't even think Buddha was enlightened. How would they know how to stage the different levels, unfold the petals of the extraordinary lotus of all of the Buddhist science, according to the needs of different levels of culture? How could anybody foresee centuries and centuries in the head like that, and do it in such a way, and their followers as well? It seems it's impossible for anyone to imagine who's a materialist and thinks material history is the true answer, and it's all whatever. So I haven't really attacked them directly in my career, not to just spend the time fighting. Now that I'm free by retirement, bring it on. I'm ready. I'm ready to argue. And they have no reason for this late date, except texts. In that some of these texts seem to quote from others that they think they know the date of, and this and that. Meanwhile, they don't know any dates about anybody in India at all, because the Indian dating thing is sort of lost, And so they're going by when something is translated into Chinese. And a lot of the works are not translated into Chinese ever, especially in the esoteric stuff. Chinese were scared of the esoteric stuff because the esoteric stuff elevates the role of women. And that's, Chinese, doing their foot binding and the whole thing, Confucian male chauvinist thing, they are not ready for that. Interestingly, strangely, the Japanese got into it. They liked it. And so it hopped over China to Japan from, some teachers brought it to China, and it was a little tiny thread there, but they basically just pushed it away. And it never became, the exoteric stuff never became important school or anything in China. But in Japan, they really did. Because we think of Japanese as very male chauvinist and patriarchal. Of course, everybody is male chauvinist and patriarchal, including especially Americans. But, except in California, I suppose. But India achieved a point from the 6th century, I think, or 5th century, where they got a little bit beyond that, both in Buddhism and Hinduism. They had the non-duality theory in both Buddhism and Hinduism. And therefore, as soon as they had the non-duality theory, they got into Tantra. Because Tantra has to do, non-duality means that unlike the other forms of more dualistic Buddhism, where basically you're not interested in the body, because you're leaving it. The body is suffering and you're going to leave it. And that's why Yoga Sutras has no Hatha Yoga. The original Patanjali Yoga Sutra back from Buddha's time, there's no Hatha Yoga in there. There's no Hatha, there's no word Hatha. That's a much later word. And the word Hatha first occurs in some Buddhist tantric texts, actually. And it refers to the two, Hatha refers to the two channels. And it refers to a sort of forceful way of approaching enlightenment. But the point is, once you have non-duality, then the body, you have to do something with the body. And this is nirvana. Well, wait, I have a body here. Wait, maybe the body's supposed to understand nirvana too, not just some mind, intellectual mind. And that's when then Tantra becomes important. And but it means that, so I'm just totally demanding a revision of the modern scholar's view of history, about the history of Buddhism, history of Hinduism too in India. Because, the first Indian professors who dug up some tantric texts, which interestingly was Buddhism, they never bothered with their Shaivite texts except for a few who were practitioners. But the sort of academic in Bengal and other places, the 19th century Indian professors who did, they had all been Victorianized in that British education system. So then, we have this sort of strange, weird yogis, sadhus, weirdos, and then some sort of erotic thing sometimes, occasionally in certain levels of practice. And then all that, that's the old crew. No, not us. That's a late degenerate thing just at the very end, before the Muslims came, the decadence, Nonsense. It was a positive thing, totally. But they were Victorianized. They're still Victorianized. You go to Goa, on the beach, and there's some fishermen, there's very few fishermen left, but there's a few. And there's a bunch of hippies and some Russians, in the discotheques nearby. And then the little girls come from the school, and they go to the beach. And then they get all excited. They're on a holiday or something, or they're having a time off. And they go and they just run a little bit where the surf is coming in. And they get their feet wet. But do they take off their white socks? No. They make their white socks get wet. They don't take their socks off. It's like, where is that from? Where does that come from? You go on the beach and just go in the surf with your white socks on. And your saris, holding up your saris like that. Anyway, never mind. I know I'm digressing. So then he says, so the ultimate of all eloquent teachings of the sage is the glorious and unexcelled Yoga Tantra. And some people call this highest Yoga Tantra. That's so bad. How can they be like that? Highest. We're higher. We're higher than you, that means. No. Unexcelled just means if you find this thing, you don't get past it. You don't surpass it. As I like to say, it's like tar baby. You get stuck there, You meet tar baby and then you want to get rid of tar baby, but you can't. Because the more you push it, then the more you get stuck on tar baby. Is that from Pogo? Where is tar baby in our American culture? You know tar baby? Oh, Brer Rabbit, is it? Okay, Brer Rabbit, tar baby. That's what unexcelled yoga does. So, and the Indians have a word for highest, parama, supreme. But this is anuttara. Anuttara means you don't get past it. So it's in the middle, it's in the core, it's in the heart of the whole Dharma. It's not highest, as if like there's some elite there that's higher than somebody else. No way. It's like those, those siddhas were like sadhus. They went and they taught the Dharma in the bars. And when they taught the tribal people. They were weavers, some of them. They were women, some of them. They were in the middle of everything. Anyway, and among them the most unutterably profound is the king of tantras, the glorious Guhya Samaja. The supreme philosopher Nagarjuna said about it. That's why I started all this. Nagarjuna, because he's the supreme philosopher. He is the supreme philosopher, but he also is great tantric siddha, great other. Said about it that the essentials of the path of the root tantra are sealed therein by the 6 limits and the 4 ways. And thus, I call them 6 parameters nowadays, and the 4 procedures. And thus they must be understood following the Guru's instructions in accordance with the explanatory tantras. Holding that fact as essential, I inquired deeply into all the subtleties of the holy tradition of the samaja, which means the community. The ultimate private instructions contained in the 5 stages, the lamp of concentrated practice, and the stages of arrangements, etc. Relying on their lamp-like illumination of the root tantra, combining the 5 great explanatory tantras, I practiced with enormous efforts, and with practice I discovered all the essentials of the samaja's 2 stages in general, and especially the essentials of the perfection stage. So that's really a fun thing. And that, he keeps separate because that is the monastic university tradition, to keep describing sort of the level of Tsongkhapa's development in the exoteric apart from his development in the esoteric. But in fact, in that 1398 moment, although Tsongkhapa himself teaches it as a philosophical breakthrough, connected with his dream and everything, he was practicing this Guhya Samaja at the same time completely. So it's like the two enrich each other, Because, you see, the emptiness, deepest understanding without doubt about emptiness, does not liberate you from relativity. It plunges you into the ultimate, uttermost commitment to the quality of relativity. It plunges you into the most complete responsibility for the amelioration of the relativity of however vast your range of awareness of the relativities around you, to the Buddha vast level where all relativity they are aware of. So therefore, that's why Tantra becomes absolutely obligatory for someone who truly understands emptiness, because it's the understanding of the complete transformability and malleability and illusoriness, like all of life is a kind of art form. And then you become responsible for making it beautiful. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, for example, the young kids who come out of Vaishali, which is like New York City or something of that time, to see Buddha in his grove, where he's staying in Bel Air, or in Westchester, not in New Rochelle, in Westchester, or wherever it is, he's staying there in a grove. He's not in the house, but he's in a grove, in somebody's estate. And they come out to ask this question, and they say, Buddha, we want to be bodhisattvas, we're going to be Buddhas, we're doing it, we're on the path, we totally get it. But what we don't get is, how do you transform the whole world? How do you purify and beautify the universe? That we can't figure that out. Because it means change the whole world with you. How do you do that? Well, what is the world? Then Buddha says, well, don't worry about that. So, and then, on and on, then he gives answers and so forth. But the main crux of his answer is, what the world is not a bunch of rocks and planets and this and that. What the world is an interactive, intersubjective mind field of living beings. And that includes gods, demons, humans, animals, insects, and then all kind of other strange creatures. And their minds are intersecting and creating a mutually experienced environment. And then if it seems stable, of course, it's very unstable actually for everyone. But different cultures try to give it stability by creating a whole story that everyone agrees with, and then somebody doesn't conform to it, and then they kill them off, or they arrest them, or they brainwash them or something, and or they consider them crazy, you know. So then they think it's very stable, and they go through the life with the illusion of the tremendous stability of it. But it's not at all stable. The universe, actually, he says. So once you realize that, then you realize that your contribution to it is part of what creates its quality. Not doesn't create it out of nothing, but creates the quality of it. And then, of course, then you want to become someone who's the ultimate artist, the best possible artist you can be of creating that quality. Like if you're in a community, you want to make the best possible contribution to the community. If you're a doctor, you want everyone to be healthy. If you're, you do that, So then they say the ultimate physician is a Buddha. Not the Buddha, but a Buddha. And then the human is the closest one who can become that kind of being. Because they can understand this kind of thing. And they can learn to be awake to their dream world. They can learn to lucidly dream. They can learn to lucidly die. They can and most difficult is to be lucidly awake. How about that one, lucid waking? We all go to a seminar. I want to learn to lucidly dream, but I walk down the street thinking about Donald Trump or Bernie or Joe Biden or my landlord or Eddie Murphy. CIL, my landlord. So, okay. So therefore, emptiness, because it wasn't understood, people thought, oh, emptiness, yeah, that's great for all those nihilistic Buddhists, because actually nirvana is just extinction, and they're just trying to destroy themselves because they can't face life. Therefore, they didn't develop Protestantism, and they didn't create Industrial Revolution, and we conquered them 500 years ago. And then we import all their mangoes over here, all that, And the Brits, were rich on them, Made themselves rich from that jewel in the crown, right? By extracting their wealth. And now they're poor, So, that's all wrong. When you realize emptiness, you become committed to the tiniest little thing, and famous thing in Samadhi Raja, the king of Samadhi's sutra, who understands cause and effect perfectly well, that person will understand emptiness. Who understands emptiness perfectly well, that person will become mindful of the most minute details of everything. They will be responsible to the minutest thing, even the minutest thought, Rather than they will disappear into a void, which is the wrong way it has been understood. Okay? So that is why that's the internal evidence of why the great emptiness philosophers were naturally the great tantric siddhas. Because these esoteric teachings are the way of accelerating many lifetimes of evolution into a single one or into a few of them. Okay? They don't just say, oh, there's no such thing as future life, we're just going to get it in a weekend. Or so. That's all fake. Okay? So anyway, that second part, then he said, by the power of his understanding of the Guhya Samaja, the essential imports of many tantras, such as Sambhara, Hevajra, and Kala Chakra. He mentions the female ones, the mother tantras, and the Kala Chakra, which is a mother tantra, according to him. Some people think it's called non-dual tantra, but they're all non-dual, so he doesn't like them. Dawned in my mind as practical trainings. I have explained these fully. I don't like training anymore, but I did it this time. I have explained these as practices, as realistic practices, I would now translate that. I have explained these fully elsewhere. This just opens the door for the discerning. So when I think this over, How wonderful you are there with me. Thank you so very much, O Holy Wisdom Treasure. I'm really going to go for that full blast now. I don't care. I'll have a big argument with the Tibetans. So then the third one is constant practice and total dedication. Remember in the first verse there he said, first I sought extensive learning, then all teachings dawned as practical trainings. Finally, I practiced all day and all night and completely dedicated to the spread of the teaching. So now constant practice and total dedication. He says, thus having become filled with the treasure of instructions, I practice by combining the two Mahayana paths, the ordinary path of the transcendences and the two stages of the extraordinary path. That's the Tantra, the extraordinary path. Tantra is not a separate vehicle, it is Mahayana. It's just the secret part of the Mahayana vehicle. So that's why he says the two types of Mahayana paths. And I combined them into a complete path of concentrated essentials. And this is, again, in this essay I want to read you from, the coordination of Sutra and Tantra. That's a really big thing. That's another one of his centrist coordinations, centrist liberation by coordinating exoteric and esoteric. All the Ganges rivers of the vows of the Bodhisattvas are contained within the vow to uphold the holy Dharma. Thus, whatever base of virtue I accumulated, all was dedicated to the spread of the Buddha's teaching. When I think this over, how nice you're there with me. Thank you so very much, O Holy Wisdom Treasure. In order to extend enormously my own virtue and to show the entrance without error in a way appropriate to the many fortunate persons of clear discernment, I wrote this record of my education. By the mass of virtues thus attained, may all beings through this same procedure maintain the unexcelled discipline of the Buddha and enter the path that pleases all the victorious ones. So that's his education. That's fun. Well, then there's the mystic visions, but I'll come back to that maybe in a later day. How are we doing here? Any questions?
Yes.
Yes, good.
I've heard you use the phrase bliss, void, indivisible.
Oh.
What the devil are you talking about?
Well, I'm not talking about the devil.
No.
But what I'm talking about is, that's the bliss. The highest, the most powerful subjectivity of the human being, beyond the duality of body and mind, is bliss. So in other words, when we understand emptiness, let's say, rationally, inferentially, which we can, is not that difficult. All things are devoid of intrinsic reality because they are made of parts and causes and effect, parts and pieces, So that means they're made of different components, so therefore they don't have a reality out of some inner essence of themselves. They're all just a combination of components. So that's the inference of emptiness, and it's fairly easy to understand, actually. You put something together, all little pieces, there's no such thing as the essence of it. Okay, just hang on. So we understand that reasonably, right? And when you do understand that, actually, and I can use, you all can be my focus group here, because I'm thinking of doing something radical. And that is, voidness actually, or emptiness, is a negation, right? And it's something called a pure negation. It doesn't imply anything else. It's just, it's what they call a straight negation, an exclusion negation. There's various terms for this in Western language and in Indian language and Tibetan language. The word in English that it means also a negation, that is a very easy word to us, doesn't get us all mystified, is the word freedom. We say, free is a negation. Bondage free, salt free, sugar free, trouble free, complication free. The free negates whatever it goes with, like that. So freedom, the dam is an abstract suffix, is the state of being negated, which is what emptiness is. So bliss, freedom, indivisible, does that help? If one said it?
Well, I'm thinking of the word autonomy, and also indivisible. Now, with autonomy,
Yeah.
we know that
Okay. Then why do you want autonomy?
Then if you follow that realization and try to understand indivisible,
Okay.
there's a contradiction.
Yeah.
Autonomy says nothing.
But autonomy is the opposite of freedom.
Nothing.
Autonomy is the opposite of freedom. But that's one reason why I don't use the word, because in the West it's libertarians, It's misunderstood. Freedom is misunderstood to mean the absolute rule of the individual. Meanwhile, emptiness means there is no individual. Actually, there's no such thing. Individual means indivisible. Individual means. Now, in a social use of the term, I actually make the argument that Buddhism is highly individualistic rather than collectivistic. Because it says that Buddha's whole revolution in the time of ancient India was against the kind of collectivist, monistic theory that every being was all one organism. The society was all one organism. And if you were the servant class, you're the feet of God, so it doesn't matter because you're still God, but you happen to be the feet, so you're serving the upper parts of the body. The Brahman is the mouth, the arms are the warrior, and so on. But breaking that, he said, no, I'm not going to be king just because my father was a king. I'm going to be a Buddha, and I'm going to help everybody. And I'm not going to just follow my duty within the monistic thing. I'm going to be free. And so you can't be autonomous in freedom in a way. Although as an individual, socially speaking, you could say individual, but metaphysically speaking, there's no such thing as an individual. We are completely composite entities, is what emptiness means, right? So so the way we grow and evolve and enjoy our presence in life is by moving the parts and pieces of ourselves, and then taking responsibility also for all the things we're connected with, and all those parts and pieces, and it goes out endlessly. And then we harmoniously try to harmonize all of that, Like to be healthy yourself, you have to balance and harmonize all the elements in your body. There's no such thing as an absolute health inside that sits there and you're going to discover it as like an essence. It's you're going to balance all the different things. Now, bliss, when bliss, freedom, indivisible. Okay, never mind. The freedom is a side thing. I'll come back to that. Bliss, voidness, indivisible means when you know voidness rationally, you become free of being stuck in thinking that everything around you is fixed in an intrinsic reality. And you also get free from being stuck into thinking that your own core essence is some fixed thing that's your identity. You realize there is no such thing. You'll see right through yourself. And even there'll be no seer if you do it deeper enough. You disappear, actually. And you sort of realize that you are a coreless being. You're that doesn't mean you can't produce bananas. A banana tree has no core, but it produces bananas. So you can produce bananas, but it doesn't come out of a banana essence core. That's what emptiness means. It's in fact able to produce bananas because it's connected to the earth and the air and the water and the wind, and then it makes bananas, I guess. So it will propagate more banana trees. I don't know why they make bananas. They don't make them for, I love bananas, actually. I have a banana. So when you know that mentally, it's very liberating. You understand with your reason, emptiness, okay? Then you meditate. And in meditation, you like Descartes, you look for the self. You don't look for the emptiness, you look for the self. And then when you fail to find it, that elephant of the self, then you realize you're selfless. But who realizes that? Well, you just disappear is what happens. You don't find a self is all it is. But that's very viscerally powerful. And you're liberated, and it's very releasing. But then you find you're interconnected with things, and then you're still this body. Okay, you may have a moment as if you were in a formless state, but then you're back in this body, And then, what is the essence of? Then you start saying, okay, well, this is emptiness. I'm right here in the body, But I realize I'm empty, but I'm still here. And so then you want to find out, well, when do I like being here? Oh, when I feel bliss, when I feel happy. Oh, okay. And when I feel happy, do I become unconscious? No. Sometimes I almost do, because I'm so used to being miserable when I'm conscious. I almost have to like have a fling or something, or mentally leave my normal state of I'm so imperfect and everything is so half-baked, you know. And but then, if you go deeper, you develop a way of knowing, of considering that blissful state that you occasionally touch as being a way of being and knowing. And then you know emptiness blissfully. And actually you already do, even when you know it intellectually, you know it blissfully. The release that you get from the struggle of who am I, what am I, and how am I relating to this and that and the other. Oh, I'm just open space, really, is what I am. But here I am, and nothing came and did anything to me. And that's a big release. It's a relief, you know. And that's blissful, actually. And then, when that bliss becomes one with emptiness, you then realize that freedom itself is bliss. Bliss itself is freedom. And that's when you're Buddha. When you know that. With bliss. That means you know it with every cell in your body. You don't just know it with your head, basically, to put it in a simple way. You know it with every cell in your body knows that. And you practically levitate. You jump for joy. You whatever, you know. When you jump for joy, then you land and then your knee hurts, and then that's a problem. If you really knew it, you could go beyond the knee hurting, though. A lot of people like to teach. They teach like when you become enlightened, everything's just the same, but you're kind of cool about it. And they're selling it way short when they say that. That shows they don't really know what it is. You know, it's not just being... Wisdom is not just being resigned to everything being half-baked. Not at all. I mean, you know, I'm still half-baked, so maybe I can't say, when I say not at all, I can't pretend that I have the certain authority of an enlightened being, because I'm not pretending to that. But I've had enough taste, and I have encountered enough people, and read enough about it, and I have a certain view of evolution and biology and physics, that I'm pretty convinced about it, even though I'm a loser myself as far as actually being bliss void indivisible. Okay, but I understand what they're saying, you know, really. Yes?
Why did Buddhism die out in India? Was it driven out by the Hindu establishment?
Well, see, this is the thing that I'm tackling. It died out, according to what the scholars say, precisely because of Tantra. It became decadent. It became like, you know, sexy and maybe violent, some sadhus. And then they got all weird and funky. You know, in India, you know, if you go to Kumbh Mela, do you know what that is? Well, Kumbh Mela is a big celebration of all the sadhus. They go to the junction of the Yamuna and the Ganges in Allahabad, or they've renamed Allahabad Prayag. They call it Prayag now. And the Hindus have renamed it, where those two rivers meet. And then 80 million naked babas, they call them babas and sadhus, they show up all stark naked, practically. And all funky and painted, and ram, they're smoking ganja, and they eat this and that, and begging, and whatever. Then there's a few come with big tents who are rich because they have disciples and they're gurus, and some industrialists became their disciple and whatever. And they still have this in India. It's amazing. And I'm sorry, what was the question? I got lost with the sadhus. Yeah. So those Victorian guys, like Professor Bhattacharya, who first edited like the Guya Samaja, and some of these 19th century Indian professors in Calcutta and other places who went to Oxford, and they're brilliant, and they know Greek and English and Sanskrit and all kinds of things. But they're very Victorian types. And then they very male chauvinist. Oh, they're terribly male chauvinist. You go to dinner with one of them, you never see the wife. She doesn't sit down with you. You and Babaji, you sit in the front. He's the big professor. And you're supposed to be honored because you're an American professor. If you happen to have an American wife with you, she's allowed to be in there with you, but she feels uncomfortable. And Mrs. Bhattacharya, she's in the back room all covered with smoke, and they're cooking and bring out the chapatis, and then they scuttle away. They would never think of talking to you and so on. You can't talk to them. Like I always do, I love being gauche. And I like help clear the plate and try to take it in the kitchen. And they'll all practically faint. Because I'm overturning the caste system or something, you know. So my point is, those guys, they said they couldn't say what really happened was it didn't disappear. It was killed off.
By whom?
The Muslims. When the Muslims conquered India, but militarily, they also melted a lot of Hindu statues because they don't like statues. They're aniconic, right? Anti-iconic, right? Muhammad destroyed all the statues, especially the goddesses, you know, Durga, with many arms. They were really freaked about that. And all the Buddhas have huge numbers of statues. And they destroyed all of them and all the paintings. They burned down all the monasteries and the libraries. And, you know, like 10 libraries of Alexandria, they burned. And Buddhism was like, the Buddhist monasticism itself is something like, you have to say, it's a neurotic family intervention institution. It's the first one. And people can leave having to just inherit grandpa's grumpy attitudes, you know, or grandma's oppressed, and also slightly cranky because oppressed attitudes, right? The family has always problems, right? Especially patriarchal, authoritarian family. And also especially in societies which is militarism is a big thing because they're fighting the neighboring city-state. That's what India was like when Buddha arrived there. But it had so much wealth, they still picked that country as opposed to China or any place west of Persia or anywhere, because India was the richest place in Eurasia. All the confluence of the different rivers, the alluvia, when you didn't have ground out or nitrogen fertilizer made of petroleum, you know, those floodplains were where you could have endless harvests, you know, like the Nile, you know, in the Mediterranean. And so that was how it was like when he arrived there. Then the monastery is there suddenly, and then people can escape there. And then they make themselves palatable to the society because they don't have children. And so they get excused from taxes and from labor and also from their caste role. And then he hesitated about allowing women because they were so much more oppressed. And he knew there'd be a flood escaping into this educational, and it's a celibate institution. And you know, they didn't mind celibacy, those women. They were married off at 8. They started producing babies at 12. And they had 8 or 10 by 20. And were all worn out. And then they were cooking. And if they didn't have a son, they forget about them. Garbage heap. So they all, no date for Saturday night? That's fine with me. I'm going over there and I don't have to cook. And I can beg my lunch free. And I can become enlightened even. And stand there around, whoa! And they just went charging by once he allowed them to come. He tried to say kind of, do you guys get enlightened in the house? You know, but he knew they would come. He knew that. Because they were so slaves. They still are in any such patriarchal society. And so this institution became key to the glory of Indian literature. And these were the big universities, and they drew people from every caste. Because once you became monastic, or a mendicant, as they put it, male or female. But then the female one collapsed actually early on, as he said it would, because the patriarchs didn't want to lose they would sell off their daughters to expand their fortune to the funky, wealthy guy around the corner. They didn't like not having command over that. And the nuns' things went down. But the male ones lasted right up until the Muslim conquest. And then these big, huge libraries, and they burned them all down. But they couldn't destroy all Hinduism, although it did destroy many temples. And they did force many people to become Muslim at the sword point, sort of at first wave of conquerors. And then after a while, when they were settling down with the wealth of India, they needed these villages to work for them. And then the villages had their village Brahmin and their way of life, to not get too freaked out. And they had but they didn't allow them to produce monasteries. They have a bunch of non-working, useless people who also taught no soldiering and no violence and non-violence and things like that. They didn't go for that. So that's how it was destroyed, actually. precisely. But the ancient Indian guys couldn't say that because that would lead to the kind of communalism we see happening right now from the BJP in India, anti-Muslim thing. So they didn't say that. They didn't know what to say. And by that time, they'd forgotten themselves what Buddhism was. Did you know there's a great book by Charles Allen, who's an independent scholar, and it's called The Buddha and the Sahibs. And it talks about how the Brits rediscovered Indian Buddhism, actually. And at first, the Brahmin informants of them, the Brahmin educated people, didn't know who Buddha was themselves. Oh, he's God. Ninth avatar of Vishnu. Oh, he was God. But he taught a bad thing about caste system and Vedas, and on purpose. God did that. And why? So that the bad people who came into India wouldn't even make our sacrifices and worship the Vedas, and so they would lose all their power, and then Vishnu will come back in the future and kill them all. That's what, and they couldn't tell. And so the Brits thought until 1820 or 1830 that the Buddha was from Africa and had somehow landed in Sri Lanka, because the Buddha often has these little snails on his head or these funny curls, the Buddha statues. So they thought he had a frizzy hair. He had a hairdo. And they didn't know he was even Indian. They knew there was some kind of Buddha guy in China, but they didn't really know that it was in India. And the Indians themselves had forgotten about it, except that they elevated him to God, because actually, what is it? Lalmani Joshi has also a wonderful book. He calls it Studies in the Buddhistic Culture of Ancient India by L.M. Joshi, J-O-S-H-I. That's a very useful one. And in that book, he gives, which was written 40 years ago, so I don't know if the numbers are still the same, but he has a statistic in there that I'll never forget. He says of the 1,250 major rock-cut monuments in India, religious monuments in India, 900 were originally made by Buddhists, 250 originally made by Jains, and 100 originally made by Hindus. But originally made means, then the Hindus took over hundreds of the Buddhist ones. And then they would change and put the different statues of Vishnu and things. And actually the statues of Vishnu look almost just like Avalokiteshvara. And Durga looks like Tara, except they have different hand implements in their hand. Vishnu has a club and a discus, and Avalokiteshvara had a lotus and so forth. But otherwise they look exactly the same. If you go to the Patna Museum or Calcutta Museum, you can see that. But they lost track of it. And why did the Indian government just now give me what are called Padma Shri Award? Because I've been over there giving talks to them over this 50 years and belaboring them about why don't they want to recover that part of their culture that they had 1,500 years, was like a major part of it. And why don't they want it? Then since independence, this is funny, a man named Ambedkar, who was a Dalit, untouchable, who was a friend of Gandhi's though, and he came to Columbia University to study law. And at Columbia University, he found books on the Buddha in English. And he said, oh, here's a great Indian teacher known worldwide who's against the rigidity of the caste system. How wonderful. We don't have to escape by being Muslim or Christian. We had our own Buddhism. And then he went back, and there's about 15 million untouchables who have moved to Buddhism. But that didn't help as far as the mainstream Indians went, because then anti-caste, unclean, all the Buddhists unclean. When I was a graduate student, my poor wife almost had tea spilled on her by the head major domo of one house in the American Institute of Indian Study house in Pune that we were staying in. Swamiji was his name, the head butler, in other words. And we normally wouldn't have had such a house, but they were putting us temporarily in the president's house, and with our two kids. And I was off studying somewhere, and he says, Mem Sahib, why does Sab go across town to the Bhandarkar Oriental Institute when he could just go to Deccan College? We have many Pandits here. How come he does that? And she said, but Swamiji, he does that because here in Deccan College there's no Buddhist scholars. And my husband is a Buddhist scholar, and there's a famous Buddhist scholar over there in the Bhandarkar Institute. And he's practically dropped the teapot. He says, and then when he recovered himself, he said, but Mem Sahib, doesn't Sahib know Buddhism? That's sweeper's religion. That was in the 1970s, Anyway, it's getting better now. So, they're recovering. And then this is the great thing. The Tibetans, starting in the 7th century, they had Tibetan houses, like Tibet houses, like this, Tibet house. They had Tibet houses in the big Buddhist monastic universities. And they were sent down by the Tibetan kings to get a little civilized, because he got tired. He decided, the Tibetans were big conquerors like Genghis Khan. But unlike Genghis Khan, they liked living over 10,000 feet. The low oxygen made them high or something, so they enjoyed being up there. They didn't want to settle down anywhere, so they didn't want to expand like the Mongolians or something. So then when you don't have constant frontiers, if you're a conquest empire, you have no loot and pillaging much to give your warlords. So then you're looking for some civilizational matrix to make them have a steady state where they can be calm, and not start rebelling and fighting each other, right? So Buddhism was everywhere, the matrix of all India and Central Asia and China and Korea and Japan at that point. And so they translated into Tibetan, and they even created a special written Tibetan just for all the Indian Sanskrit books, based on their thing. And so luckily the cream, 5,000-6,000 of those books, of the cream of those giant libraries, of course there were tens of thousands, but at least 5,000 or 6,000, the very important one, which very beautifully translated into Tibetan. Subsequently, all but 5% lost in Sanskrit, only 10% translated into Chinese, and none of the really technical ones into Chinese, mostly some scriptures mainly. And so this treasure is just waiting. And I had the good fortune or ill fortune, as you would like to say, when I finished my PhD in 1972, I go see my old guru, and the Dalai Lama's visiting at that time. And no, that was later, he added to it. But anyway, initially I'm my old guru, and he says to me, originally he by himself, he says, okay, now you've got your PhD, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to go teach, what do you think? I'm supposed to teach. I'll try to get a job. And he said, okay, don't just work for the professors, he says. I said, what do you mean for the professors? I'm supposed to become one. I got a PhD. And he says, yeah, but you have to, what you have to do is you have to translate the whole tenure. 4,000 books. And I said, what? And he said, yes, you do. And, well, you won't get it all done right now, but you create an institution and you do that. And and I didn't take it too seriously. Then a little bit later, when Dalai Lama was allowed by Kissinger, or not by Kissinger, but by Cyrus Vance and Jimmy Carter, to come to America for the first time, 8 years later, or no, 6 years later, then Dalai Lama, oh, that's a great idea. You have to do that. And I said, oh, please give me a break. And he says, well, it'll take 3 generations, he said. But you get it started. And now the Indians are appreciating it. I'm making a center in India, hopefully from this Tibet house and from the Institute of Buddhist Studies. So it's another organization that we have. So actually, a lot of the great Tibetan lamas all are considered reincarnations of the great Indian Pandits and Siddhas, So in a way, like the great leaders of this huge educational movement in India, they seem to have they've got themselves reborn up there, at least that's what they think, and they reproduced the whole thing, and it more quickly switched to those vicious conquerors that the Tibetans were, into yogis, like in their huge monasteries. So they had no military. That's why they were so defenseless in the 20th century. They had no military by the end of it, because like the famous thing that the shoguns did, they put all the samurai into Zen centers, it was their way of dealing with that. There was one film where one samurai says, he says to the other, one daimyo says to the other daimyos, we're in great danger. What's the danger? It's an outbreak of peace. What are we going to do with all the samurais, And then they put them all in Zen centers to pound their own heads against the wall instead of pounding other people's heads, That's monasticism is a great device for that, to stop. All the Christian monasteries, by the way, were all started by ex-generals, Basil, Benedict, all those people. They were originally military people. in the desert fathers type of people. But then when they want to get more organized and have big institutions, the generals did that usually. They got sick of all the bloodshed. Yes?
Earlier, you were talking about Tsong Khapa's visions of Manjushri.
His what?
His visions of Manjushri.
Yes.
And you said that the deity is only visible to his mind sense.
Yes.
So, who or what is the nature? Like, who is he talking to? In your
With the nature of what?
of the being that he's speaking to.
Of Manjushri?
Manjushri or any.
Well, okay. Sure. Good question. Well, remember I've been sort of saying, circling around, but since I'm trying to do Tsongkhapa, I haven't gone full blast into the definition of Buddhahood, the Mahayana definition of Buddhahood. And when you become a Buddha, it has to do with your expanding your ability, the flexibility, the resilience and flexibility of your sense of identification. And the human being has the ability to identify with a loved one, and in extreme moments, ecstatic moments or something, and not always erotic, can be with the birth of a child or something. The mother and child, the mother feels they are the child. Sometimes the father even might get into it if they're not at the office. That they identify with another being. And then the people in platoons in the war, they identify with their buddies, football teams, etc. The human being can identify with a larger group, right? And then all these like nationalism, tribalism, casteism, there are all these different ways. Because actually our own psyches are very unstable. So, but the ability to identify with another empathically is considered a high achievement that has enabled us to leverage our cooperativeness to manipulate all life on Earth, and actually when then misharnessed, this intelligence and interactivity and collective intelligence that we have, we're obviously destroying the Earth now by not really noticing what it is that gave us our power. We think we got it because we're like big macho. We have these idiot militaristic myths of the mighty hunter, which I always love to tease. And mighty hunter sitting, hiding in the cave as the saber-tooth is out there growling. And Mrs. Mighty Hunter finally says, look, I take a little stick and I stick it on a piece of meat here when you guys get off your ass and go hunt something, and then I put it over the fire and cook it. So why don't you make a big sharp stick and go out and get that tiger? Oh, that's a nice idea. But you first, they tell each other. And then finally they all run out with some stick, and then and sooner or later we get machine guns and, ray guns or whatever finally, right? But so we're not mighty hunters. So we're chicken, and we figure out smarter things to do because we're kind of chicken. That's my chicken view of history rather than mighty hunter. So anyway, that's our thing. That's our strength, right? Then when you become a Buddha and you realize emptiness, that empathy and that sense of identification expands limitlessly. And the Buddhists say this in their own language, but they say that a Buddha perceives every other living being as a loving mother perceives her only beloved child. So that means you're identifying with everybody. So once you realize emptiness and relativity, you're not sure you're you or you're you, or the other guy you're looking at. You're not solidly ensconced inside the skin looking out, and that's the other person. You become identified with everybody. That's how it's defined. The Dharmakaya means the Dharma there has the meaning of reality. So reality becomes your body. All reality becomes your body. So you're everywhere. And then once you're everywhere, it's strange. It might sound at first very interesting, and it also might sound like a nightmare because a lot of people everywhere are suffering. And a lot of animals and insects, that doesn't just mean people, it means every kind of being. And you feel all their feelings, unlimitedly. And because your life is endless anyway, you never stop being alive. You just change bodies. The whole idea that you're going to be nothing, but you might believe yourself personally, you might be a secularist, I'm not sure. You're not, oh good, that's a good thing. But the secularists are crazy, they think they're going to be nothing. Nobody can be nothing. It's not possible, because unless they don't know what the meaning of the word is. because nothing isn't there. It's not a place you can go. It isn't something. So everything is continuity, right? Like law of thermodynamics, And the mind is just a subtle level of that constant energy. It takes different shapes and forms, which is actually a little bit frightening, in fact, if you didn't have any way of controlling it, right? And that's why death is frightening, because if you don't have any way of controlling your mind. So okay, you're a Buddha and you're everything, and luckily, because you got to be that Buddha through bliss, void, indivisible, bliss, freedom, indivisible. You became free of being stuck as anything, and so you're everything. And you're not everything in the form of just open space. There are moments where you experience everything as open space, and every being becomes transparent to you, and you see them all as bliss too. But then you haven't destroyed a single thing. You just see it at another level. And then they're all still there at their level, and then you are also fully aware of all their misery. So you're simultaneously bliss and completely open to an infinite web of suffering. And then you realize, however, it's hopeful because you realize that those beings don't have to go somewhere else. They have to wake up to what they actually are, which is made of bliss. And the human form they have achieved already, from evolving through all many forms, not always securely up, could be up and down. It's not like one Precambrian, like Carl Sagan, Precambrian slime up to tenure at Cornell. Not necessarily. It's all up and down and beyond human. Everyone's been gods, and because it's beginningless also. The universe is beginningless. And there are many planets where there are humanoid beings and other kinds of beings, and many in the future. At least the Indian Buddhists thought so, and they claim to have discovered that and traveled to those places even, and they have accounts of it, and which is all dismissed as just crazy Indians, by the modern people. But I don't think it's so easily dismissible. So then, where did the manifestation come from? So this makes you are one with. There's a deity in the Kalachakra Tantra called Vishvamata, Vishvamata means, I wrongly used to translate it for a long time as universal mother. But Vishva doesn't really mean universal. Vishva means variegated, multifarious. So it's the multifarious mother. And then she's said to have a body that needs no atoms. That's empty of atoms, not only empty of intrinsic value, but also it doesn't need any coarse matter of any kind. So therefore it has ultimate resilience. It's sort of at the subatomic energy level, and yet it can shape out of that a body as needed, of the variegated mother of all beings, so actually be the mother of all beings. So if you get like that, that I think expresses how they understand what they call. You have the Sambhogakaya, so you have the Dharmakaya, body of reality, and then you have what's called the Rupakaya, which is a body of matter, material body. And that has two levels. One is called Sambhogakaya, which is like a total bliss body. And that's your blissful sense of oneness with the freedom. And then it has something called Nirmanakaya, which means emanation body. And so the idea there is, it's like all reality seems virtual to you when you're like that. And you can shape out of that virtual reality whatever it is that helps whomsoever needs help. Do you follow? And there's no limit to your ability to do that. It's very theistic, actually. But it's nicely theistic, in my opinion, because it doesn't claim to control anybody. It doesn't claim to have created anybody. We're all in it together. In a way, it's all uncreated in one way, because it's all this ultimately fluid, malleable, plasmatic kind of reality. But on the other hand, it can be experienced through wisdom blissfully or experienced miserably through ignorance. And so your whole job is to help people find not some other reality like that Buddhism is selling them or something, but their own actual nature. And the lucky thing is the nature of life is blissful. It fits with its surrounding. So it's like human beings, what's our problem? Well, all this regenerative farming, that is a huge thing about overcoming this carbon destruction that's going on right now. Have you ever looked into it? It's amazing. They go around planting cover crops. They throw out that crappy Monsanto, and like not to Switzerland, they bury those bastards. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. They get rid of them, and they start planting cover crops and all sorts of things, and that draws the carbon into the soil and back into the roots of the plants. And they don't plow the land because that exposes sucks out the rich, and we lose tons of topsoil out of every acre of Iowa every year. Every acre loses tons of topsoil, and they suck it off, Cargill, Daniel, Midland, and they sell us this absolutely denatured food. We have to take some vitamins, they add something. I mean, it's really horrible. I'm reading this book, this wonderful book by a dear friend of mine, Mark Hyman. It's called The Food Fix. And he shows about the food system. The cancer is in there. It's in the soil. It comes from Monsanto. It's unbelievable. And all the other companies that are like that. It's just incredible. And I didn't really realize it's just as much as the fossil fuel thing. It's just as much pollution comes out of the factory farms, the feedlots. Oh, ruining the water and the air and the huge carbon, just unbelievable. And the way of producing all the feed that's given to them. 75% of the arable land in the world is just to feed animals. It's just insane, the whole thing. And that food is grown chemically out of petroleum. I mean, we're all locked up in an insane trap. Whereas, when we try to let the plants grow in their own way, return to some sort of a field, then suddenly all the carbon goes and disappears. It's the machine that's the drawdown machine. Did you ever read the book Drawdown? Well, that shows all this kind of, there's an avant-garde that is beginning to really get this kind of thing done scientifically, And then the most horrendous thing that I discovered lately really blew my mind. But I'm off the subject here, but not really. But the green nukes. There's a new generation of thorium nuke and another kind of nuke they have. Sweden is carbon neutral already. It's interesting that Greta comes from there because Sweden itself is carbon neutral. Because they have a new generation of nuke that is not pose such a huge problem. It's 1,000,000 times better than coal or oil or gas. And but it will produce some bad pollution. But then they have already dug 2 miles down a place to drop it after 50 years of producing terawatts of energy in between while building up the renewables. Norway also is. Norway sells the stuff, but they are completely renewable also, both those countries, and cold climate. But they need the nuke. The ones in Sweden anyway need the nukes. They don't have all that oil though. They don't have enough hydro. So I'm sorry for that digression, but I'm very into that nowadays because I'm a great grandfather. What's that? I'm sorry. Yeah, but green, but even more expanded than people. People just think Green New Deal. Tend to think. I was thinking before I went to study with Al Gore, in one of his teachings that he does, and then been reading up a lot of other things. I thought it was really just stopping fossil fuel subsidies, etc., which is really important and should also be done. But it's more than that. There's a lot more complications. But it's very doable, and we have to 10%. We have to stop the pollution, the carbon pollution in the air, 10% a year for 10 years, and we'll be back into a sane, there'll still be catastrophes, but it won't be. If we keep increasing 3 or 4 or 5%, which is what we are now doing, half of all of the industrial carbon pollution has happened since the year 2000. Just in 20 years since our government was stolen by the oil industry. And Mr. Al Gore was kicked out. Half of it. That is 1850 to 2000 is one half, and 2000 to 2020 is the other half. They're intensifying. They're doubling down and intensifying and freaking out that much. These crazy people in Dallas and Houston. The rainfall they had in Houston didn't teach them a lesson. But I know that's off the topic. I know. So anyway, Gangla Gangdul de la Detamba. Whatever helps anyone, that can be manifested to them by such a being. So Manjushri is he and Avalokitesh is considered the compassion of all Buddhas, Manjushri the wisdom of all Buddhas, and there's a Vajrapani who's the competency, I don't say power, but competency of all Buddhas. And these are called 3 special kinds of Buddhas who act as bodhisattvas. And they therefore appear as this wisdom deity to these academics academic yogis, because you have to be a yogi to be a good academic. Just blabbing and just in your head, you're not going to be that great an academic. And they're what they think of as academia. You have to walk your talk and live your understanding and live it. That means yogi. You join your life to what you understand. That makes you a yogi. That's what yogi means. Yogi doesn't just mean adopting a certain posture, And so I know it's a physics but I consider it a physics. When emptiness is a physical discovery, without the machinery of cloud chamber, electron chamber, or whatever that is, it's a discovery by personal experience. Because after all, we are all relational beings. And so you discover that everything in nature dissolves under analysis, and you completely dissolve under analysis. When you discover that, in a way, you smash your own atoms in a thought experiment that is like a machine. It's like a cyclotron, like an electron accelerator. Your own mind becomes like an electron accelerator, and you realize you don't just kill yourself. Because you don't bother yourself, but you find out that you are infinitely divisible. Even your atoms are infinitely divisible. And so the discovery of the infinite divisibility of the atom, and therefore the instability of matter, was already discovered by Buddha. And he taught that. And that was not a bad thing. It was a good thing. Because it didn't mean that matter didn't exist. It just means that you can't pin it down, own it. You're not stuck with it. You can move it around, and you can be creative with it, is what it means. It would seem to be, they have, in fact, one of their reasonings, they use these, what they call absurd consequence, reductio ad absurdum arguments, the most advanced type of physical scientific philosophy, where they say if all things had intrinsic reality, then the realization of emptiness would destroy them all. And anybody who ever once destroyed it, the whole world would be destroyed by that person. And people have an experience of everything disappearing. He said there were altered states of meditation where everything seems to disappear, and the state of disappearance seems to not disappear. But actually that's a superficial awareness. It's a deep one, takes a lot of effort to reach it, but in a way it's also superficial because, of course, the state of disappearance also disappears. And when the state of disappearance disappears, you're back, And then the goal there is to bring that state of where the ignorant way of seeing everything as if it was a thing in itself has disappeared, and yet you still see them as relative things by swooshing those two together. I mean, and that's a physical discovery, I would say, the discovery of relativity. And then it relates to a biology where mind is a force in nature. And the individual continuum, life vitality continuum, life energy continuum, individual in a social sense, in other words, in the sense of a certain boundaried being, has a endless continuum and comes from an endless continuum through an evolutionary process. Darwin would not, this whole thing they're freaking out in Texas and Arkansas and everywhere about, I ain't related to no monkey. We're teaching creationism in our school. I don't know if you've ever seen those things where the fundamentalists they have this white guy that's supposed to be Adam, but they have him in Kenya. But he's like just has a bandage on his rib. And it only happened like 7,000 years ago. I mean, come on. So they already knew that thousands of years ago. And more than just a species, it's you yourself. So it's like Darwin himself discovering he'd been a chimpanzee or an antelope or a giraffe, in the past. Given infinite past, you can't exclude anything, any form. Or in the future you can. He wouldn't want to be a giraffe in the future. So he wants to figure out how to leverage the human self-aware intelligence and the human genius with the human vulnerability and figure out how to live bliss void indivisible.
Maybe this isn't the place to talk about Padmasambhava.
Well, we can get there. Shapkar? Did you ever run into Shapkar? Matthew Ricard and his guys, they did the biography of Shapkar, Life of Shapkar. It's one of those Nyingma books.
But I am a student of the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yeah, I like it too. There's various books of the dead.
Clear light.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. There's various ones.
It's almost like what they're describing, you might refer to that clear light as a separate place out there.
Yeah, but it isn't. It's this right here. There's no out there.
The clear light is right here.
Absolutely, we're made of it. That's what we are, clear light. And that's bliss, and we only know that through bliss.
Isn't Nirmanakaya that coming down?
Nah, when people make all dualistic categories and they think something's coming down from somewhere, and something's higher than somewhere.
But that's the Sakya.
No, they don't say that.
Position.
All kinds of individuals get into it because they all want to be higher than other people. But actually, it's all here. Everybody has it, and it's fine. There's no difference with the Sakyas or the Nyingmas. Actually, they're all the same. I was just going to say about Padmasambhava that Shabgar had a vision, and Padmasambhava told him that Padmasambhava, was Tsongkhapa. So don't worry. Okay, we ran over because I got into that Buddha thing, which really gets out there. So by this virtue of all our study and your good questions and our thoughts about it, may we become Manjushri ourselves as soon as possible, and may we bring all, for the sake of all beings who may also become Manjushris. That's the nice thing, is that everyone gets to know everything. It's not, Buddha doesn't want to be higher than anybody. Buddha, when one time Dalai Lama blew my mind when he was talking about this famous thing about where Buddha says, he says, monks, a wise person is like a goldsmith who buys the gold after cutting, melting, and rubbing on a touchstone. Not just because the seller says this is gold, and then they buy it. And therefore you, when anybody says anything, including me, you should measure it with your critical reason, with your experimental experience, and whatever, how it fits your life. With three analogies: cutting, burning, rubbing, and then accept it if it fits and it suits you, and otherwise not. And not just out of devotion to somebody supposed to be holy or someone supposed to be enlightened or whatever. That's useless. And the Dalai Lama is sitting there in Switzerland. I was on the side. And he was leaning forward like this, and he was saying, I can just hear Buddha saying that to all this crowd of students and disciples. And he's talking to 10,000 Europeans, mostly Europeans there, a few Americans maybe. And I'm on the side because I wasn't really there, but I was just visiting him for some work. But I got to sneak into this one. And he's leaning like this, like a waiter in a restaurant. And he's saying, I can see Buddha just begging his students. Don't just say, oh, Buddha said so. No, think about it, question it, doubt it, and then make it your own, or not, or throw it out if you think it didn't fit you. And because he knows it's no use, and they're just repeating like a parrot something he said. And he was really, and then I was looking this way, and there are a bunch of gurus over there, some Tibetan, some from other religions and things and other traditions. They were sitting over there, and they looked really uncomfortable. Some of them, about this idea that the teacher is the servant of the student. The Buddha is the servant. The enlightened is the servant of the unenlightened, not the master of them. They all go on with their masters. Master. Hegel had that one. A master has to have a slave. That's not Buddha. Buddha is not anybody's master. But some people, if they need to have a master to teach them,
This video was brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa membership community. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit tibethouse.us. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.